Come prop up on Thrive Fantasy this season. Thrive Fantasy is a daily fantasy show app for player props. They've eliminated the need to do countless hours of research because they only ask you about the top tier athletes. Choose 10 out of the 20 player props for the NFL options to build your lineup. Use promo code CIRCLE when you sign up today, and you will receive an instant match bonus up to $50 on your first deposit of 20 or more. For those of you who struggle at math, that would mean if you deposit 20, you will get 40, 30 gives you 60, 40 gives you 80, all the way up to that $50, $100 bonus. Again, use promo code CIRCLE to get that bonus. Download Thrive Fantasy on the App Store today or Play Store, or by visiting their website, www.thrivefantasy.com. Sign up and hashtag prop up today.
Yeah, go on, Mike. What's up, dude? Great read. We put that all together for you. Big shout out to Corey over there who absolutely crushed it with that read. Oh, man. Well, with putting the read together from Mike, of course. But, oh, man, now that was fun. That was something that I was looking forward to premiering, and today just seemed like it'd be the right day. So what's going on, guys? Welcome on into Fantasy Intervention. We have a hell of an episode coming at you guys. You know, normally this is my DFS show for Thursday nights, but with there being no Thursday night game, of course, and, you know, the Saturday slate taking over, man, I really, really wanted to attack that. Like, that's something that I wanted to go after time and time again. So I've done it before, and normally I do really well with it. We crushed it for Thanksgiving. You know, so I wanted to dive into that and really try and make you guys some big time money this week. So let's go ahead and get this episode kicked off, everybody.
This is Fantasy Intervention. Now here to intervene with your fantasy life, Chase Vernon.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome on into Fantasy Intervention once again, the DFS show for Saturday. Yeah, get excited. So whether you have players playing on Saturday or, you know, you're into DFS like I am, you know, you want to tune into the show because I actually dive into the analytics, dive into the numbers, and we talk about what's there to make you guys money and, you know, how we can exploit certain things. I mean, we talk about the different shows that I've done, and honestly, these small slate shows where it's not just one team, but it's like two or three, man, they are my favorite to attack time and time again. Because when you look at it, you can have one player who everybody else is on completely blow up the entire slate. And it's fun to watch that happen. The chaos is just fun. So sitting here and diving into it, it's a little bit weird. I feel like I should have probably waited till tomorrow or, you know, possibly Friday, although I work on Friday. But, you know, sitting there looking at it, the biggest thing that I'm checking out is the injuries. I mean, this year has been brutal, but this week, it's tough. It's more so than normal. I mean, sitting there looking at the Dolphins, we got Gesicki, we got Parker, we got Ford, got Gaskin for the Dolphins, who I believe Gaskin's actually back, so I might as well leave him off. But it's brutal for the Dolphins. There were 7 different receivers who saw snaps for the Dolphins over the past 2 weeks. 4 different tight ends and 4 different running backs who saw snaps. That's 15 different skill position players that actually saw snaps on offense for the Miami Dolphins. Meanwhile, we sit there, we look at it like in comparison who the Cardinals, I was already on it, so I just picked them. They only have 16 offensive skill position players that saw a snap the entire season. So, yeah, it's something as to where without having all the details for this matchup, it's going to make it a little bit more difficult. But there's one guy that I'm going to be fading, and I make sure I fade regardless if he plays or not, and that's going to be Devante Parker over there. I know it's kind of a sexy matchup, but if you guys listen to our injury report, go to youtube.com/fantasyintervention. You guys will actually see the show from last night where I had Adam on for the injury report. And he talked about how he's compiling data and how Devante Parker, even if he plays after an injury, typically if he's still hurt or if it lingers a little bit, he's actually really terrible. So I do know for a fact I'm going to be fading Devante Parker, but I'm going to dive into who I'm attacking here in a second. When it comes to the Raiders side of things, it's a little bit, less questionable. Ruggs is probably the only guy. They do expect him to return, but they don't know if he's actually going to play because they don't know if he's good enough shape to go out there and run the types of routes that he runs. So Ruggs should be playing. Outside of that, there's nobody else. I believe actually Hunter Renfrow might be one other guy, but we know the car is going to be out. It's going to be a Mariota show. So at least on the Raiders side of things, it's a little bit more calm. As for the 49ers game, this is a shit show. Mostert's out. Jeff Wilson looks like he cleared it, according to the reports, which is good news. But I still have a little bit of question with that ankle injury. It was a re-aggravation of his ankle, so that can end up hindering him a little bit. But either way, Jeff Wilson should see the majority of snaps. That's a good thing because Mullen, he's out. CJ Beathard, he's leading this offense. Oh, man. It's tough. It's tough because I can't sit there and try and break this up because he's only played like 2 half games. His production's actually been really well. Like he's actually probably had the best stats overall for any of these quarterbacks, but it's tough to know who he's going to pass to. So I'm sitting here and I'm looking at it. I'm like, man, does Kittle play, right? If Kittle does play, does Reed actually still get a chance? Because they do play a lot of 2 tight end sets. Plus, we got a lot of the receivers out, which I'm going to dive into here in a second. But, is Dwelly going to be an option? Because Dwelly was still getting more snaps than Reed was, but Reed was dealing with an injury. So, once again, it's like a dog trying to chase his tail out here and trying to figure out this whole situation is just a mess. I mean, Debo's obviously out, but Richie James is hurt, right? He was at walkthroughs, but he's hurt. It's tough. It's just all over the place. But as for the Cards, Edmonds played last week after not practicing, but he had it in a knee injury. We don't know what's going on with Hopkins. Hopkins is in a weird situation over there. They said that he didn't show up for the post-practice meeting, the media meetup. That's strange because typically you have to be injured in order to not show up for that meeting. So there's a lot of speculation going on. I'll dive into that as well. But then we talk about Fitzgerald. He was injured. Darrell Daniels, he's questionable. Max Williams is questionable. Yeah, it's just tough out there for this game. As for Tampa Bay, this is actually cool, like a little bit, right? Because we have Jones. He's most likely going to be out this game. At least that's what they're predicting. So, yeah, we got Fournette, who should actually see the majority of the snaps. That's a good thing because the receivers, that's a mess that I'm going to dive into as well. Anyways, Galladay on the Lions side of things is the only person that's looking to be questionable for the Lions. So that's nice. That's real nice. As I sift through these injuries and stuff and, try and read between the lines of some of these scenarios, I'm going to try and build some of these lineups for you guys on Saturday for the DFS slate. So, yeah, it's something where, like I talked about, I crush these smaller slates. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at just the ones that I referenced. Like Thanksgiving, I had Gibson locked into every lineup. We had Adrian Peterson in a ton of lineups as long as Swift was out. Hawkinson was in almost every lineup, and he actually should have done better. He just had a weird thing that he did after he caught the ball and ran towards the defender. It didn't make much sense. But yeah, I mean, that was still his best yardage output of the season. Duke Johnson was another one that we talked about. But yeah, it's something as to where I love these smaller slates, and I'm excited to actually dive into this. The first one that I'm going to start out with, because the way that I like to build these smaller, normally with the bigger slates and everything, I like to find my stacks first and then add in the studs as they fit in. For this one and these smaller slates, I actually like to find the studs that I want to put into my lineups and kind of figure out how the pricing is going to work out to add the stacks, because of the fact that the stacks, like you're talking about quarterbacks who we had Ryan Tannehill and was it Herbert? It was, these top 10 quarterbacks are never as consistent. So for the smaller things where if one quarterback that has over 40% ownership or so ends up bombing, you end up taking over the whole slate almost. You end up really starting to make money. So I actually like to find my studs that I'm not fading, that I'm going to be playing in most lineups prior to finding my stack. I know it's a little bit weird way of going about it, but for this small slate, this is how I love doing it, and I'll do it every single time, and I make money every single time. Absolutely love it. So first one I'm going to start off with is going to be a heavy chalk guy. Just to give you all a heads up, it is very, very chalky, but I am smashing Leonard Fournette. I mean, we're talking about Detroit being one of the worst teams in the league against the pass as well, but the run game especially And we're sitting there with Leonard Fournette, who had 2 touchdowns last week. It wasn't efficient, but he still had 2 touchdowns last week. And we see that Detroit is allowing 25 touchdowns to the running back so far on the year, on the season. Like, that's insane. It's a touchdown and a half a game. Probably more than that. I think it's like a touchdown 0.66 game. Either way, this is something as to where I am smashing Leonard Fournette into the majority of my lineups. I mean, we saw Shady McCoy end up not getting a ton of snaps. I think he saw like 12 last week. Keyshawn Vaughn got a couple touches. I think he had like 4 yards or something. This is something as to where Leonard Fournette is the guy, and he's going to go in there being the guy, and he's going to go in there and get the touches in a game that could end up being a blowout. Like, we could see Tom Brady and this Buccaneers team end up throwing 2 touchdowns early, getting up by, 2-3 touchdowns total. All of a sudden, you're sitting there just running the ball. You just want to run the clock out. I do know that they want to build this chemistry between Antonio Brown and whatnot, but come on. Like, Leonard Fournette is this smash play this week. I love Leonard Fournette. I know he's going to be chalk. I don't care. I'm eating the chalk, and I'll go and make up for it in other places. So, if you decide to fade Leonard Fournette, you're doing it because you're either playing Evans, Godwin, and or Antonio Brown, and you're thinking that Matt Stafford can actually keep this competitive. I don't know if that's the case. I don't think that's the case. I actually highly doubt that is the case. So it's something as to where, hey, if you do fade him and he doesn't go off, great. Like, you end up fading probably good 40 to 50% of the DFS lineups. But I don't see any reason as to why they would pull him out of the game or why he wouldn't be in there. Now, I also don't know why he was a healthy scratch to this day. If you know, please leave it in the comments. I don't know why he's a healthy scratch the other day, but I can't find a reason as to why Leonard Fournette won't go off. It's just crazy to me. I still want to play Antonio Brown. I still want to play Godwin. I still want to play Evans. But I'm sitting there looking at their upside potentially being limited, even though the secondary is beat up and giving up the 31st most explosive pass plays. So I'm sitting here and I'm looking at it and I'm like, man, I got to play one of these wide receivers as well. Issue is which one's going to go off, which one's going to have the good game. And I dove into the Detroit defense and I'm like, dude, they're letting every wide receiver, like, have big games against them. The slot is giving up points. The outside possession receiver is getting points. They're giving up targets in the red zone to the wide receivers. They're giving up, I already talked about it, the 31st most explosive pass plays. So I can't sit there and trust that Evans is going to have like a 2 touchdown game, right? And that he's going to see 10 targets. I can't trust that Chris Godwin is going to be getting it underneath because I don't know if they're going to have to pass enough. Meanwhile, Antonio Brown might be the DFS play of the week because they're giving up so many explosive pass plays. So this is a situation as to where I'm smashing Fournette. He's my stud. But I am also going to play a combination of one of these 3 wide receivers. Now, the way the pricing works out, I think that I like Antonio Brown the most, plus they connected for their first touchdown this past week. I think he had like 93 yards, something like that. So, yeah, I'm sitting there and looking at it like, man, I think that Antonio Brown can do it. I mean, Tom Brady, he's throwing the most deep balls in the entire league right now, 5.4 deep ball attempts per game. Right? Like, that's something you can trust, except for the fact that he's only completing 37.3% of them. So it's like, it's really getting to me. Tom Brady has not been good with the deep ball this year, but I still think that with such a porous secondary that gives up some massive plays, I think that, I hate saying this, but I think that Antonio Brown is probably my top wide receiver, from the slate. Man, it's bad. Tom Brady, I'm sitting there looking at the stats. Tom Brady, his catchable target rate is 25th in the NFL. It's just crazy to me. Anyways, sitting there and looking at it, I want to play Leonard Fournette, and I'm going to have shares of Mike Evans. I'm going to have shares of Chris Godwin, but I'm going to have a good amount of shares for DFS tournaments of Antonio Brown. So sitting here and looking at it, right? Yeah, and by the way, sitting here and looking at it and running it back. This is something as to where I want to attack this game very heavy, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit of how heavy I want to attack this game. But there's another lock for me in this slate, somebody that I want to play in every single lineup, and that's going to be Hawkinson. Man, I love Hawkinson this week. You can't run it up against Tampa Bay, and I'm probably going to say that 10 times throughout this episode, but you can't run it up against Tampa Bay, right? Meanwhile, Galladay is most likely not going to come back. At least that's what we're looking at. He could come back, but he most likely won't. Meanwhile, Hawkinson's only had 2 weeks this entire season where he did not hit his value at 4,600 for DraftKings. Only 2 weeks where he did not hit his value. One of them was this past week. Matt Stafford kind of struggled a little bit to an extent. He still threw for like 252 yards or something, but he was dealing with some major injuries. Should be healed up a little bit more this week. And I think that Hawkinson could absolutely smash. I think it's going to scare ownership off. But at 4,600, dude, all you need is 9.2 points, and you're talking about hitting the value. Everything after that is a multiplier. That's literally, 2 receptions for 10 yards and a touchdown? Everything else is bonus after that. Hawkinson at 4,600 is a smash. I absolutely love it. Sitting there looking at it, if you can't run on him, right? And you can't pass to some of the wide receivers outside of the slot and Tyreek Hill. Like, you got to go to the tight end, and tight ends are torching Tampa Bay. They are sitting there allowing touchdown after touchdown. They even allowed a touchdown to Carolina to the tight end. This is something where I am smashing Hawkinson into most of my lineups, just like I did on Thanksgiving. As for the next game, we're sitting there looking at, or my next smash play, we're sitting there looking at Hopkins, all right, at the wide receiver position. And let me just say, just looking at, I'm have the injury report up on my screen right now. This is bad. This 49ers team cannot catch a break. Sherman went back on the injury report with his calf. They think he might have re-aggravated it, but he could be sitting out just to try and let it heal up. Ward can miss the game with a concussion. Brett practicing full, so that's good if they can get him back. The defensive line is beat up this week too. They can't catch a break. Hopkins is a smash play for me. And I know that's kind of obvious, but he did have a 2-game stint where he was really subpar up against New England and Seattle. But the thing about DFS, and the people that don't play DFS have to understand, I'm saying he's a smash play because his pricing is absolutely through the roof. Let me actually pull up his pricing real quick because I know he's the most expensive wide receiver. Yeah, he is, 1,600 more than the next closest person. To put that into, perspective, there's not a single player, at least from 6,700 to 4K, that's outside of $600 of separation. So you're talking about a huge gap of 1,600. Now, if you can sit there and you can finesse Hopkins into your lineups because some of these plays are relatively cheaper, then you're talking about really having a significant advantage over your opponents. Meanwhile, I don't know where you'd really spend the money, that 8,300 that he's worth. So Hopkins for me, dude, he is a smash play. And I think you have to figure out ways to get him into your lineup. And whether that's, paying down at the quarterback, whatever, he's my favorite play on the entire week, I'm pretty sure. One of them, he's up there. Sitting here and looking at it, right? He had his best performance on DraftKings last week, 34 points. And, oh, yeah, there was an issue that popped up today. We got to figure out what's going on with that injury report. But, yeah, I'm smashing him in as long as he's there. And meanwhile, when we sit there and we pop over to their opponents, I'm actually going to have a lot of shares in this game, the Arizona game and the 49ers. We're sitting there looking at it, and their over-under sitting like 49, I believe. 49, somewhere around there. I think they could actually beat that out. And it's weird to say because the 49ers are so beat up, but this is a division rivalry. This could be very competitive. They haven't played since week 1, so it's really tough to sit there and say, hey, this is what happened week 1, blah, blah, blah. Plus, Verrett missed time. We don't have Jimmy Garoppolo on the other side. It's a completely different team. But sitting there and looking at it, I really love Jeff Wilson. But I still think that Ayuk and Kittle need to be in a lot of your rosters. Now, there's only going to be a couple of them where I play them together, right? There's only going to be a couple because of the fact that if you think that these 3 players can all 3 go off, you're talking about them scoring probably 5 touchdowns. I don't know if they can get that much. Maybe they can. But I'm looking more at 3 to 4 touchdowns with a few field goals, being able to move the ball to an extent. It could turn into a little bit of shootout. I think that Ayuk is going to tear them up, right? They struggle with quick receivers. We saw Cooper Kupp, Tyler Lockett, those type of receivers tend to beat. They tend to destroy this team. So it's something as to where I like Ayuk a lot. I think that Ayuk can give them a fit. Meanwhile, Kittle, if he plays, man, we got to check the injury reports, but if he plays, he's a volume monster. And if you look at his pricing, you're going to laugh. I'll give you a few seconds. I'll give you 2 seconds while I take a sip of my drink. I want you guys to guess how much Kittle is. Wow, I believe Darren Waller is sitting at 7K. Make sure I'm right on that. Yeah, Darren Waller's sitting at 7K. I want you guys to guess where George Kittle's sitting real quick. All right, time's up. He's sitting at 5K. George Kittle, I know he's coming off an injury. I know Arizona's very good up against the tight end, but he's 5K, people. That absolutely blows my mind. I don't get it. I really don't. I mean, I understand that they have, the injuries involved, which has to factor in, and then his previous week's ownership over the past 4 to 6 weeks. But that's crazy to me. George Kittle at 5K? Come on, baby. That's going to make some people some serious money. Now, he's going to be chalk. He will. But if you sit there and you talk about 5 receptions and 50 yards, that will actually net you his value. Everything after that's a bonus. So he gets 5 receptions, 50 yards, and a touchdown. You're talking about, time and a half towards this bonus. I love that. Arizona allows Arizona, they don't allow a ton of, huge plays, but they haven't played a bunch of great tight ends. And I know, I do get it. George Kittle did struggle earlier in the season, but come on. 5K, I'll take it. Now, as for Wilson, because we did want to talk about Jeffrey Wilson, this is something where Arizona actually allows a ton of breakaway runs to the running back, right? This is something where they're going to lean super heavy on the running back. Arizona, man, it's sitting there and you look at the fact that they're allowing 10 touchdowns on the ground to running backs, but 6 of those 10 touchdowns, which by the way, 10 is not a lot, but 6 of those 10 touchdowns have come over the past 4 weeks. These injuries are crushing the front 7 for the San Francisco 49ers. So guess what? The Arizona situation over there, it's crushing these opportunities for the running back. So anyways, Wilson is going to end up crushing it. He has a nose for the end zone. Shanahan trusts him in the red zone. He has 11 carries in the red zone over the past 3 games. And yeah, his efficiency has not looked great. But with that many red zone carries, man, you got to hammer that one home. He has 6 at the goal line. 6 goal line carries over the past 3 games. I love that. God, I'm going to smash that. Yeah, so Jeffrey Wilson is a smash play. Ayuk is going to be in quite a few of my lineups with Jeffrey Wilson. And then the ones that I don't have, man, I'll probably have George Kittle in. Now, sitting there looking at it, in the next game, we actually have Lynn Bowen Jr. as another one of my locks. And I love Lynn Bowen Jr. this week. I love him. I think that Lynn Bowen Jr. is going to be my most owned player. Sitting there, over the past few weeks and watching him play his games, because I've been watching his film and whatnot, Tua's looking at him constantly. Even if he's not the main guy, he's sitting there, he's checking out his first read, and he's immediately checking over to Lynn Bowen right after. Now we're sitting there and we're looking at his opportunity. I know he hasn't put up big time points for DFS. It's not insane. It's 10 point something and 15 point something, which is okay. But it's still over 10 points. And guess what? Lynn Bowen Jr., he's only 3,900. He's only 39. That is 100 less than you can get the cheapest running back. It could be a 4-string running back. The cheapest you can possibly get a running back on DraftKings is 4K. Lynn Bowen Jr. is 3,900. Now, you can't play him in the running back slot, unfortunately, but looking at his potential, it's through the roof. He has caught 17 receptions on the 20 targets over his past, 3 weeks or 2 weeks? I believe it's 2 weeks. Either way, his efficiency, it's been a little bit in question. It should increase if Parker plays and if Gesicki plays. Meanwhile, he has earned a role in this offense. I don't think his upside is limited, right? And honestly, he would have doubled his value now 2 weeks in a row. Yeah, I love it. Absolutely love it. Each of his 2 weeks, the past 2 weeks, where he has over the 10 points scored, he's faced the number 3 and the number 4 defense up against the wide receiver. Now he has the Raiders and Marcus Joyner, who, by the way, are the 12th. He's the 12th worst defensive back in the slot. And Nevin Lawson, who is the other slot corner, isn't much better. I believe the Raiders are 20th up against the wide receiver. This is a smash play for Lynn Bowen, whether Parker plays or not, whether Gesicki plays or not. I love Lynn Bowen Jr. Absolutely love him. sitting there and going through the defensive matchups, since week 5, only Calvin Ridley and T.Y. Hilton have been the top fantasy wide receiver for their team against the Raiders, who also did not lead their team in snaps from the slot. Let me drop that one more time. Since week 5, only Calvin Ridley and T.Y. Hilton have been the top fantasy wide receiver for their team up against the Raiders, who did not lead their team in snaps from the slot. Lynn Bowen's going to crush. He's going to crush faces this week. I love it. Absolutely love it. Now, one more lock. He's the most expensive running back on the slate. Oh, and by the way, Sean's in here. Sean said, hey, happy holidays to you too. But Sean said Lynn Bowen revenge game. I love that. I'll take that 100%. So going to, we have the most expensive running back on the slate. Very similar to DeAndre Hopkins, by the way. This is something where I know that you're going to play him in your season-long leagues and stuff. But for DFS, some people might fade Josh Jacobs. They're a little bit nervous with everything going on with Derek Carr, with Marcus Mariota, with Josh Jacobs' injury. I get it. And honestly, the Dolphins, that defense has been incredible as of late and really good up against the running backs. But keep in mind, the last 4 weeks, they faced the Jets, the Bengals, and the Chiefs. We know that they don't have good running backs. Joe Mixon doesn't have a foot. Then they faced last week the Patriots without Henderson, or without Damian Harris. Sony Michel put up like 73 or 74 yards on him and a touchdown on like 10 carries. He averaged like over 7 yards per carry. That's absolutely insane. Like we're just talking about the rushing, side of things. Like, oh, I love it. But sitting there and looking at it, Josh Jacobs, I don't want to sit there and play him up against the Dolphins just for the rushing upside. I want to talk about the passing upside because he has 11 targets over his last 3 games. I know it's not a ton. Like, it's not Alvin Kamara, but, I mean, it added 4.7 points back a few weeks ago, then 5.5, then 6.8, and he's seen an increase in snaps since getting hurt. So if you're sitting there and you're talking about adding 4.7 points, 5.5 points, 6.8 points to his total, I mean, that's massive. That is absolutely massive. He can at least get you, 80 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Dude, you're talking about, 14 points for that? You're talking about a 20-point performance. Meanwhile, I understand it's expensive, but he is worth his value 100%. Josh Jacobs, for me, is a smash play. And it's 6,600, people. 6,600. He will end up in a lot of my lineups. You're talking about, triple multipliers at that point, or doubling his actual value. That's crazy. That is absolutely crazy. All right. On to, let's just see. On to, the games that I want to attack. These are the games that I'm sitting there where I'm looking at the game scripts and I'm like, man, where do I want to find my stacks? I got my studs. I got the majority of my lineups made up. I now need to find a quarterback who can connect with a wide receiver, with a running back, and really bring value to the team. Get me over the top. I told you guys, I find my studs first for these small ones. Like for these 3-game, type slates, I find my studs first, and then I build around my studs. Normally, I go the complete opposite way where I want to find my stacks first. Now I have to find the value, so I have to look up these game scripts. And up first, we have Marcus Mariota. Marcus Mariota over there. Yeah, it's crazy. As a potential stack up against the Dolphins, and I'll tell you why in 1 second. But before I do, a quick word from our sponsors.
Come prop up on Thrive Fantasy this season. Thrive Fantasy is a daily fantasy show app for player props. They've eliminated the need to do countless hours of research because they only ask you about the top tier athletes. Choose 10 out of the 20 player props for the NFL options to build your lineup. Use promo code CIRCLE when you sign up today, and you will receive an instant match bonus up to $50 on your first deposit of 20 or more. For those of you who struggle at math, that would mean if you deposit 20, you will get 40, 30 gives you 60, 40 gives you 80, all the way up to that $50, $100 bonus. Again, use promo code CIRCLE to get that bonus. Download Thrive Fantasy on the App Store today or Play Store, or by visiting their website, www.thrivefantasy.com. Sign up and hashtag prop up today.
Once again, a huge shout out to Mike, who absolutely killed that. And I just realized I don't have my stuff up for Twitter. Anyways, guys, so sitting here looking at it, this is a game where we have to I guess this is a situation where we have to look at scenarios. How are these games going to play out? How can I make money? How can I beat out the other people in these lineups? So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at it like, man, Mariota, like this Dolphins defense is no joke, but Mariota's kind of sexy. Like, what if he does go out there and lights it up? The Dolphins, they struggle with mobile quarterbacks. They really do. In Miami, they've shown that they can score when they need to. It's not normally not the case. Miami doesn't normally need to score, but this could actually hit the over on the over-under relatively easy. If I sit there and I break it down, right? We talked about it on yesterday's waiver wire show with Marcus Mariota up against the Dolphins. The Dolphins have allowed Josh Allen, mobile quarterback, right? 41 points. Russell Wilson, 24 points. Kyler Murray, 43 points. Justin Herbert, 24 points. And Cam Newton, 25. In fact, the only quarterback that was mobile that they struggled against was Cam Newton this past week. Cam Newton's not the same quarterback he was to start out the year. Definitely a little bit more beat up. It's something as to where Mariota last week was a top 10 quarterback. I believe he was quarterback 8 for most leagues. But 15 of his fantasy points came on the ground. I know it's not sexy, and I know you don't love it, but at the same time, he's the cheapest quarterback on the slate. And if they struggle up against mobile quarterbacks and he can beat that blitz with the RPO, this could end up being a very high-scoring game. So if this case scenario, right, actually happens, you guys already know I'm playing Bowden because it's going to be catch-up mode, and I love Bowden, so he's in no matter what. But Gaskin actually got activated off of the reports, right, off the injuries. I love Ahmed. Ahmed was one of my studs going into the season. I love him. I have him in multiple different dynasty leagues. He's on my taxi squads. I drafted him in the 4th round of most drafts. I thought he was going to end up playing for the 49ers, to be honest with you. I really didn't see the Dolphins getting him, but he signed like the next day after the draft. He was that dude, and I loved Ahmed. But I want to sit there, and I want to look at the passing opportunities because if Mariota does go out there and light it up, Miami's going to have to pass. And guess what? Gaskin is a pass catcher that they love. They tried to get Ahmed involved in this passing game, and he didn't really do anything. I think he had 5 targets or something like that in one game. Outside of that, I think he had like one reception, and then 0 reception. So sitting here looking at it, like the Raiders, they're allowing 5.5 receptions and 41 yards to the running back per game so far this season. Gaskin, who's averaging 5 targets a game, should see a little bit of an uptick if this scenario does happen. So I'm sitting here and I'm going to be playing Marcus Mariota, and I'm going to talk about who I'm going to stack him with here in a second. I want to run it back. With Gaskin at 5,300, who's cheaper than Ahmed, who should have the starting running back role. Although I still will, by the way, have a couple of shares of Ahmed. I'm not saying fade Ahmed. I'm just saying I like Gaskin slightly more. Hopefully he gets that starting role back. And then Bowden. But sitting there and thinking about who do we run out with Mariota? Because we don't know much about him. We know that he sucked over there for Tennessee, but he was constantly hurt. Like, what's the deal? And he's gone through these hot streaks where he can bring fantasy value. So I don't hate Mariota. But sitting there and trying to figure out who he's going to go with, man, it's something to where, like, do I go with the chalk? Do I try and fade and go with one of these sleeper type guys? And I think that Waller is my number one answer. And honestly, like, it was really close to me making him a lock. But with him being the highest priced tight end, right? And then him also being chalky, those are two things that I never want to do. So although I do think he can go off, I'm not going to have him in every single lineup. He is still a stack option for me, though. And I'll still play him in lineups that, I don't actually have Marcus Mariota in. I'm just not going to have him in a ton. So if I'm sitting there and I'm going to stack Marcus Mariota, right, this is going to actually help out the pricing situation because Mariota is the cheapest quarterback on the slate, but Mariota might also be a slight chalk play. Like, I'm expecting probably 20% ownership or so on Mariota if I had to throw a number out there, 10 to 20%. So sitting there and looking at these two together, I think that it works out. I just don't want to lock it in every single lineup. The Dolphins, they're sitting there and their tight end rank is ridiculously overrated. They've played like one top 10 tight end since week 8, but they've allowed double-digit fantasy points to 6 of those 8 tight ends. That's crazy. Like, double-digit fantasy points to the tight end position in 6 out of those 8 games? Come on. Like, this is something where Waller could absolutely smash 2 weeks in a row. Or maybe 2 out of 3 weeks, whatever it was. So The 2 weeks that the teams did not produce, it was the Jets and the Pats. So, enough said about that. Waller should be a play in a lot of these lineups. And honestly, like even at 7K, he might be a little bit undervalued if he can go out and put up 45 points again. That was nuts. Waller's sitting there, and he's going to be attacking Nick Needham, right? And I've been attacking Nick Needham. He's the slot guy over there for the Dolphins. And sitting there and looking at the Dolphins' ability to get pressure on the quarterback, it's something where you need these quick releases. So not only is Waller a potential start because Needham is the fifth worst ranked slot cornerback, we also have Hunter Renfrow, who could actually be a start. And Renfrow, I don't love. I'm not like, oh my God, you got to go play Hunter Renfrow, this smash play. But he makes a lot of sense in cash at his pricing, especially. He got a concussion last week, so I do want to keep an eye on that. But he's hitting the practice fields. It's very encouraging that he will play this week. But Renfrow is a play, even if you want to throw him into a tournament. I know his upside is limited, but this 2 touchdowns, potential type thing, that's a perfect tournament play. I don't think his ownership's going to be high. We sit there, we talk about the inability for the Dolphins to defend up against the slot. I like it. I think that it's a good play. I like Hunter Renfrow. But let's just say that he doesn't play. We got Aguilar, who moves the slot a whole ton. I'm going to be on him regardless on a few lineups. Yeah, I absolutely like Aguilar as well. And then Henry Ruggs with the explosive pass plays allowed. I'll be playing him as well if he does play. So I just want to recap this. My stack results, this is who I'm going with. We're going to go with Mariota, with Josh Jacobs, because we already talked about how he's a lock, and Darren Waller. That's a stack lock 100%. But I'm going to have a couple shares, whether I don't play Jacobs or I don't play Waller. I'm going to have a couple shares of Nelson Aguilar, have a couple shares of, not even a couple. I might have 1 share in a tournament of Hunter Renfrow. And I'm going to run it back with Gaskin and Bowden, a couple lineups with Ahmed in it. So just with this stack, you're probably talking about a total of 4 to 7 total lineups. Maybe a little more than that. So sitting there and looking at the next game, we have the Cardinals and the 49ers. And this is a scenario that could lead to a very high scoring game for both teams, to be honest with you, because Cardinals can go off at any time. But the Cardinals are also susceptible. They've got, some injuries, right? And they also allow some breakaway runs. The front 7, meanwhile, for the 49ers is obliterated. So this could give Kyler a ton of time to drop back a pass. This is something where the 49ers just run on the whole game and keep on getting these breakaway runs. Meanwhile, Kyler Murray, he's just sitting back in there throwing it. Now, would I rather have the rushing upside from Kyler? Absolutely 100%. But honestly, I don't know if he's going to scramble as often if the 49ers are actually hurt up and beat. So I need to once again go check the injury reports once we get closer. But yeah, I'm sitting there looking at an opportunity for not only Kyler to go off, but Chase Edmonds to have another successful week, who did well last week as well. I believe he led the running backs for carries and production from this game. So I still like Drake, and I'm still going to have him in a few lineups, but sitting there and looking at it, the Cardinals could be up big from the passing opportunities. Could be, a game for Edmonds. Meanwhile, we're sitting there looking at the 49ers grounding the clock. Or we could just see a shootout on both sides with how many injuries are out there. So looking at my stacks, I want Kyler Murray. He's my quarterback. And depending on what happened to Hopkins, he's already a lock. We already talked about that. Edmonds will make it into my lineups where I have Kyler Murray. And I'll keep an eye out for Andy Isabella. He's been a healthy scratch 2 weeks in a row. But the 49ers, they allow some of these speedier guys to actually succeed. So just keep that in mind that Andy Isabella could be a flyer opportunity, but I want to see, if he's actually active first. Now, oh man, if I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the 49ers opportunity to score, I absolutely love the breakaway run potential. It's something that's where we already brought up Jeff Wilson Jr. We talked about George Kittle. We talked about Ayuk. But what about Tevin Coleman? Is there a chance that Jeff Wilson Jr. actually has a little bit of, an ankle issue or could re-injure it again? And Tevin Coleman gets in there? What if Jeff Wilson can't move the pocket? What if they're getting second downs or 2 yards on second down? Dude, Tevin Coleman is actually a play for me. And I'm not going to jam in every single lineup or anything like that. But in lineups that I don't play Jeff Wilson Jr., I still think you need to play a running back up against Cardinals. And Tevin Coleman, who has that straight line speed, who has that breakaway potential, he's not very, agile. He's not very quick, but he can have that breakaway run. I like Tevin Coleman this week. He's not going to have very high ownership at all, and his price is almost nothing for running back. So, yeah, sign me up. Sign me up for Tevin Coleman. He's healthy and could see a role. Now, to recap this stack, we're looking at Kyler, Hopkins, and Edmonds. A couple shares of Drake. Dart throw for Andy Isabella if he plays. But we're going to run back Kyler, Hopkins, and Edmonds. We're going to run that back with Wilson. And then combinations of Ayuk and Kittle. Most likely, I'm not going to be playing them in the same lineup. Typically, like if you end up having them in the same lineup like this with Ayuk, Kittle, and Wilson, they're going to cannibalize each other. Or you're going to sit there and talk about CJ Beathard, like throw in a ton and get a ton of fantasy points up there in the air. Talking about probably 5 touchdowns in this game, which I don't know if San Francisco can actually handle, although I do think it can be somewhat of a shootout. I'm probably going to just have one of these pass catchers in my lineup if I do play running back as well. Now, we have one more game before we actually close this one out, guys. Just one more. You guys have suffered with me this entire time. We have one more game to cover, and I saved this one for last because this one really fucked me up. And it's not because of injuries or anything, to be honest with you. If anything, this game is the most clear game out of all of them when it comes to injuries. But the reality is like this over-under could end up being through the roof. And I just don't know how they're going to stop. I don't know how Detroit's going to stop Tampa Bay. I just don't know. It's sitting there, we're looking at it, and it's like every way that you can have a wide receiver beat the Detroit Lions, they do it. They allow slot guys. We talked about it. They allow slot guys. They allow possession receivers. They allow guys to beat them deep with the 31st most explosive pass plays. It's something as to where I couldn't find something that I did not like. Like if I'm sitting there and trying to take things that I don't like about Tampa Bay, Mike Evans in most cases is going to need a touchdown to be fantasy relevant, although he was not last week, but he still in most cases needs a touchdown. Meanwhile, we have Antonio Brown where Tom Brady cannot throw a deep ball very well. We talked about his completion percentage at the beginning of the show for deep balls, 37.3, I think. And then we have, of course, Chris Godwin, who's coming off an injury and has not been performing up to the standard that I hope for Chris Godwin. Plus, I mean, his ceiling has been, like 20 points, which is good for DFS, don't get me wrong, but, like, that's not, Mike Evans type ceiling. So, like, there's negatives for each one of these guys, but there's not negatives for the defense. They don't shut down one of these positions. They're pretty much like, hey, throw wherever you want it, man. We'll catch up with you guys later. So it's very, very frustrating for me. I'm sitting there and thinking that this is a very dicey situation. I mean, wow. Yeah. As for the passers, but I do think that Leonard Fournette, like we talked about, is probably my biggest smash in all this. Like, forget the fact they've only allowed one running back under 100 yards. I mean, over 100 yards. Wait, am I right on that? No, that was the Tampa side of things. I apologize. I got a little bit ahead of myself on the scrolling. So, anyways, this is something as to where, like, we could see them actually get attacked in multiple different ways from the quarterback position. But what if they get ahead early, right? And they want to protect Tom Brady, and they want to sit there and run the ball more often. I mean, Detroit is allowing, I believe, the 31st most explosive run play. So, yeah, Fournette's a smash for me. But the only way that I could sit there and actually talk myself into playing Tom Brady this week, and I know this sounds weird. I know this sounds really, really weird because he is the top quarterback for a lot of different people. And I think by the way, season-long leagues, go play him. Like if you're in a championship game, go play him. That's fine. But just keep in mind that his ceiling could be capped. If I'm sitting there and I'm looking at it with, Stafford, like he is going to have to play lights out to keep this competitive. He's going to have to play lights out. You cannot run on Tampa Bay. They've allowed not only one running back to get over 100 yards, which is what I was just saying, but they've allowed one team this entire season to get over 100 yards rushing on the ground from the running back position. So I know it's strange, but sitting there and thinking that Matt Stafford is actually the play in this, I think is the right process. It's making me question the fact of Stafford actually being this top guy, and I'm talking myself into it like as I talk, because I mean I'm sitting there, and what happens if Brady throws 20 times this game? What if Matt Stafford has to throw 50 because they go down big? Even if he is hurt, I don't care. He threw for 252 yards and I think 2 touchdowns last week. I'm cool with that. I want a bigger upside, but It's not like Tampa Bay has been good up against the wide receivers. They've been very porous. Matt Stafford can sling it, and he does really well with these competitive games. With DFS people, we're looking for opportunities to smash. We're looking for times to fade these high ownership players. And sitting there looking at it, I think that Tom Brady could actually probably hit 40, 50% ownership this week. He really could. I mean, his only real competition is going to be Kyler Murray, who's, I think, a lot more expensive than him, to be honest with you. I know that the Tom Brady's second, but Kyler Murray is 1,200 more. I'm sorry. No, Kyler Murray is 700 more. So sitting there and looking at this opportunity, I think that Tom Brady could hit that high ownership, and I think he could be a fade option. I mean, we talk about opportunities. We want passing opportunities. We want those 50 attempts. We don't want 20 attempts. And I know that efficiency is amazing, but it limits the upside. That's why I like Tom Brady for cash games, but not for tournaments as much. I still am going to play a Tom Brady lineup in tournaments, by the way, but not as much. If I sit there and I talk about fading 40% of the field and Stafford gives me, I don't know, even remotely close to the amount of fantasy points that Tom Brady can get me, you're talking about a win because you're talking about 1,200 less from Tom Brady to Matt Stafford. 1,200 less. And all they have to do is be somewhat close. And we don't have to have completion percentages. We don't have to have efficiency. At the end of the day, we're talking about yards. We're talking about touchdowns. And that's it. So Matt Stafford for me is going to be way more on the Tom Brady in tournaments, but I think he could actually be my top quarterback and where I want to base my stacks off of for this slate. I love it, man. I mean, I'm looking at 3 of the quarterbacks that should be under 10% owned on Saturday. That's going to vault Brady up in ownership. I don't think that Stafford's going to be very highly owned. God, man. If Brady goes out there and throws 20 passes, completes 15 of them for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, it's very possible, and that's a great cash game, but I don't know if that can win you tournaments. God, Stafford's a smash play. All right, I'm going to give you guys 2 stacks for this one with Brady, one with Stafford, because I was trying to decide which one I wanted to go with as I went live. But sitting here looking at it, you got to pick your poison with wide receiver, and I'm dead serious. I haven't ever said that on a show. I'm never I don't know, or I don't have a feeling which way I should lean on this. This is the first time in week 16 you guys have me on record with saying I don't know which one has the best chance to go off because they all have different ways to make it happen. And, I'm going to sit here and hope that when I do play one of these wide receivers in one of my lineups, along with Tom Brady and Leonard Fournette, because they could go up big and go up early and then just run the clock out, I'm going to hope that this receiver has the 2 touchdowns that Tom Brady throws. I could see a world. Tom Brady has gone out there and hammered it home on teams before. I've seen it. Don't let off the gas. Throw 5 touchdowns. That's very possible as well, which is why I'm still going to have ownership of Tom Brady. In that case, you can play multiple pass catchers, but if that's also the case, then you're probably not going to see Leonard Fournette be a tournament-worthy option. So I want to sit there and look at Chris Godwin, and I want to play Chris Godwin because of his pass catching upside and the amount of volume that he's going to get. And honestly, he could be the lowest ownership. Could be him or Antonio Brown for lowest ownership, just because Godwin hasn't been producing lately. Meanwhile, Antonio Brown, he had the one hot game, so the DFS grinders are typically going to be off him because he has not been seeing the target volume. But all 3 of these guys, they can make it, break it for you. They really could. I am going to fade Gronk. I know they're not going to go there. Detroit's been really good up against the tight end, kind of surprisingly, so I'm not going to go there. But yeah, Leonard Fournette, man, he's going to get in the end zone in this one. He's going to have a touchdown. And then if I have to choose some people to run it back, if I go Tom Brady route, that means that the Lions are most likely going to be down. So I got Hawkinson, which we already talked about, and I'm actually going to have a couple shares of Marvin Jones Jr. He's actually been really dirty for 5 of the past 6 weeks, or 5 of the past 8 weeks. He's been a smash play. And at his pricing, absolutely a steal. We're sitting there with him being like the 8th, I believe, most expensive quarterback. He's at $4,900. That's dirt cheap. If he can get you, 2 touchdowns or even a touchdown, man, 100 yards receiving, anything like that, you're talking about major multipliers as to who to actually play. Now, I do want to make sure that I mention that Swift could actually be a play, although I don't like the running backs up against Tampa Bay. They have allowed receptions to the running back position, so if Detroit does go down, they start losing, I think that he could end up racking up 5 to 10 receptions, possibly get in the end zone as well. Sitting there and looking at his pricing, these prices are crazy, but sitting there and looking at his pricing, man, for tournaments, Swift is going to be in quite a few of my lineups. Maybe not as many as Marvin Jones Jr., but he's going to be a few of my lineups. Now, I will say, by the way, Stafford's 400 yards, or 2 weeks removed from 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I'm sitting there and I'm looking at it and I'm like, dude, like who's some of these other flyers? Because I haven't found very many flyers throughout these matchups. But who are some of these flyers that can go off? And of course, I came across this game because this game had to make it a little bit more difficult than I needed to be. But Hawkinson, who, by the way, he was number 2 on the team for snaps. He's sitting there looking at a smash play. Like he's number 2 on the team for snaps over the past couple weeks. He's getting in the end zone. He's getting red zone targets. In the slot over there with Sean Murphy bunting, Mohamed Sanu is an absolute play. And honestly, I don't even hate Danny Amendola. I don't hate it. Danny Amendola is the main slot receiver. Mohamed Sanu just travels there from time to time, very similar to Marvin Jones Jr., but sitting there trying to find a tournament sneaky play if I go really chalky throughout this entire, matchup. Like if I go a Darren Waller and Tom Brady, Leonard Fournette, Josh Jacobs, if I go like the chalky route and I need something to kind of switch it up, Mohamed Sanu makes perfect sense. And Danny Amendola, who's more of a cash type play, but he makes sense too. And I actually like them as 2 of my best flyers on the week. Now, running it back with the Tampa Bay's receivers, right, is going to hope that you can actually find the value towards one Tampa Bay receiver. But if you sit there and you look at it and you think that Leonard Fournette's not going to get in, I could see a situation where all 3 receivers go off. So if I'm sitting there and feeling a little bit dangerous, I could play all 3 receivers for Tampa Bay. I don't love that idea, but it is a thing, especially if I'm going to sit there and I'm going to play some of these dart throws and get contrarian. It can make sense. But as my stack and sitting there looking, if I go with the Stafford point of view, maybe Detroit goes up. Maybe it's something that's not going to happen. If we sit there and we look at Stafford actually having some of this upside and being able to smash this slate and smash this play, I don't hate the fact of you playing 2 Tampa Bay wide receivers because it could turn into somewhat of a shootout. So if you decide to go with the Stafford stack, I still like Leonard Fournette far more, and I even like Keyshawn Vaughn probably playing more than I like running 2 of the Tampa Bay wide receivers out there. But it still makes sense if you think that this game could actually turn into a shootout and they get away from the run completely. It's happened with Tampa Bay multiple times where Arians just starts calling pass play after pass play after pass play. But sitting there and thinking that that's actually going to be a relevant thing and playing a ton of lineups with multiple pass catchers from Tampa Bay without playing Leonard Fournette, I think you're going to cannibalize yourself and you're kind of going to eliminate that, especially if you're playing Stafford over Tom Brady. So it's still a play for me, but yeah, I don't want to get too contrarian with those takes. I really love Matthew Stafford. I like running it back with Fournette. I like having Hawkinson in there, and I like running one of these wide receivers in multiple different lineups to see if I can hit. Anyways, guys, I appreciate you all for tuning in. This has been a DFS show. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you all for letting me intervene with your fantasy football life. I'm out.